You begin to perceive reality the way it is now, in the moment. All of that stuff back there is only just a learning. It's only to be recalled if it's going to be effective now. If it's designed to get you to feel bad or to be manipulated, you don't go there. You simply don't go down that road. The if-onlys. If only I hadn't done it that way. Whose fault was it? That's a favorite. You know, let's look back and look at all the fault and all the things that we can do to assign blame. When you assign blame, you get all the blame. What I tell people to do is take all the things in your life that are wrong and that aren't working and assign blame to them. You know, I'm fat. Who's at fault? Sarah Lee, all right? Or somebody like that. And I'm broke. That's the Dow Jones' fault, or it's the Ayatollah's fault, or it's somebody else's fault. You place the blame there. Now look at your life and see if it's any different. See if it's improved in any way. You'll find that blame or fault-finding doesn't do anything except make the victimizer one step ahead of you in the game. Let's look at a few strategies for stopping yourself from being victimized by references to the past. When someone starts telling you things that they've always been a certain way and we've always done things this way, you could respond very nicely with, "Would you like to know if I care about what you're telling me right now? Do you think that what you're telling me right now is relevant? Do you believe that how we did it last Thursday or last year is really the issue here?" Confront it right away. As soon as you get that, you disarm the potential victimizer. Try to eliminate the should-haves from your own life and from your own conversations, Try to get that word, what you should have or would have or could have, out of your life. Understand that all of that is just a reference to keep you from being effective today. It's just nothing but a blame-a-seigneur. Don't use it yourself, and you'll find yourself flagging it real fast when other people use it on you as well. If someone asks you why you did something, give a very brief 1 or 2 sentence response, and that's it. Don't keep going on and over-explaining it. The more you over-explain, the more you're going to find yourself victimized by them. Don't be afraid to admit that you're wrong when you do something. Just simply say, "You're right. You've made a very good point. I will learn from that, and I won't do it in the future." This is one of the great things that my wife and I are able to do with each other over and over again. Instead of having these endless arguments, you stop yourself right in the middle and say, "You know, you're right. You made a good point. I was a jerk. I did behave stupidly. I'm going to see if I don't do that." It stops. I've seen my wife have her mouth fall almost onto the floor when I've just turned around and stopped being pushy about it and admitted, "Yes, you've made a good point." Usually the person doing the most talking is the one that's wrong, who try to learn from the past rather than repeating it and making references to it all the time. Silently forgive all of the people in your life who you feel have wronged you in some way. That's such an important lesson to learn, forgiveness. All of those people who behaved towards you in the past that you might still be hanging on to today. The ex-spouse, the child that doesn't call, the person who borrowed money from you and hasn't repaid it, the parent or grandparent who ignored you or abused you in some way. Forgiveness is a very, very powerful tool. All of the spiritual masters who have ever come our way, including, of course, Christ on the cross, when someone threw a spear into him, his first words were, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do." That's such an important concept to get. The reason that Christ was saying, "They know not what they do," is because he was really saying that when you throw a spear into me, you throw a spear into yourself. We are all connected. We are all one. The same thing is true for all the people who have harmed you in some way, so it's like a snake bite. If a snake comes along and bites you, no one ever dies from the bite itself. The bite is just a wound. You can't undo a snake bite. What kills you is the venom that is pouring through your system and destroying you. The metaphor here is that what is destructive to you in this whole business of not being victimized by what is over is the venom, which is your thoughts that you carry around. The behavior is done. You can't undo it, change it, or get it back. If you already did something, you can't repay the money that you never repaid. That's all done. It's over with. But what you can do now is decide not to carry that around. Don't let their behavior destroy you. Mark Twain put it this way: forgiveness is the fragrance that the violet sheds on the heel that has crushed it. You have to know how to do that. Once you let it go and get rid of it, I can remember someone trying to sue me over some silly little thing. I was angry and filled with rage about it. I was going to really show them that they couldn't do it. Once I let it go and sent forgiveness instead of hate, the issues I worried about so much melted away. The same thing will happen with so much of the victimizing that you experience. Get forgiveness into your heart and you'll find yourself a whole lot better off not being victimized by all that stuff that happened years and years ago. Pulling your own strings is another common way people manipulate you. Instead of you pulling your own strings, there is the comparison trap. In a world of individuals, comparison is a senseless activity. You are unique in all the world. No one can get behind your eyeballs and be you. No one can experience you. The only thing anyone can use to experience you is their mind. Everything else is a step removed. Their thoughts are what they have to experience you with. Similarly, you experience everyone else with your thoughts. Loneliness is experienced when you don't like the person you're alone with. Alone is just a state of being. You can be in a crowd at the largest stadium in the world, surrounded by 100,000 screaming people, and experience it uniquely. No one can get behind your eyeballs and inside your ears to experience things the way you do. The color red you see is your red. They can't see it the way you see it. This is a very important mental concept to grasp to avoid being victimized by other people. People will compare you all the time and use this as a way of controlling, manipulating, and getting you to behave the way they want. When you understand your existential aloneness, you know that you are unique and special in all the world. Then you stop the inclination to compare yourself to other people. You stop constantly telling yourself that you have to be like others. You can't stop constantly striving to accomplish and achieve at the same level that other people have achieved. You get past the whole need to keep up with the Joneses. This is a way of putting yourself into a victim trap that is almost impossible to get out of. Even if you're in a race with somebody else, if you're looking over your shoulder to see how you're doing in comparison to how the other person is doing, what you're really doing is saying that you are in charge of how I am feeling right now. However you perform in comparison to me is what makes me happy or unhappy. You've turned the strings over to somebody else. Turn the strings over. This is a really big issue for most people. Many find themselves unable to isolate themselves from comparing themselves to others. Children grow up in a world where they hear about peer pressure all the time. There's a lot of peer pressure. Everybody has to fit in, and if you don't fit in, then you're isolated. If you're isolated, then you're a reject. If you're a reject, then you're an outcast. It all leads to these horrible labels that we place on people. We have to raise children to understand that there's no peer pressure in the world. There are people who will say, do things the way I do them. And then there are individuals who say, I've got a mind of my own. You want your children to have a mind of their own. You too want to have a mind of your own. You want to think for yourself. You don't want to be told constantly that you have to do it because everybody else does it. If you do things the way everybody else does, what have you got to offer? If you're just like everybody else, you have nothing to offer. You're just one more sheep bleeding away. You don't want to be that way. You want to understand that there are standards and norms within a society that we accept as living standards. But you don't compare yourself to other people. You don't have to go out into the world and look at others to determine how you're doing in your life. That's got to be an inner thing. It has to come from within. Yet there are many people who will constantly compare you and use various techniques and strategies to get you to conform by saying, "Don't you see that other people are doing that?" But the first thing you have to do before you can eliminate others doing it to you is to get rid of it yourself. Now, I get rid of the notion that you have to be somebody who others accept or like in order for you to feel good. You don't want your children to believe that, well, everybody else does drugs, so that's why I did it. Or everybody else is jumping off the cliff, so that's why I jumped. Or everybody else is drinking and driving, so that's why I do it. Or everybody else is not wearing any clothes to school, so that's why I go naked. It's an absurdity. If you're constantly comparing them to others, don't be surprised when they do it themselves. Raise them to understand that yes, there are peers who will try to pressure them, but if they buy into it, they are the victim. They have to decide for themselves what is morally proper, what works and doesn't work, and what is effective and ineffective, not some invisible standard called peer pressure. That is the biggest cop-out I've ever heard of. Let's look at some of the victim traps in this comparison business. Here's the first one. Why aren't you more like your brother? Or why aren't you more like your sister? Or why aren't you more like Sally down the street? You find that when somebody else is telling you to look at yourself and ask you the question, why aren't you like the other? Why? Well, raise them to understand that yes, there are peers who will try to pressure them, but if they buy into it, they are the victim. They have to decide for themselves what is morally proper, what works and doesn't work, and what is effective and ineffective, not some invisible standard called peer pressure. That is the biggest cop-out I've ever heard of. Let's look at some of the victim traps in this comparison business.